welcome back to a series of lectures on floriculture. Today we will be talking about a plant which is considered to be the oldest in terms of pot ornamental cultivation. The plant, as you can see, is begonia. This plant has two values, wherein not only the foliage, again you can see here, that is the leaves, but also the flowers are ornamentally beautiful. This plant actually is named after a botanist known as Michael Begon, who is a French botanist who is given the credit of trying to domesticate and develop it into a commercial ornamental. Historically, this is one of the oldest, wherein a record reveals that it was discovered way back in the 16th century, and ever since it has been domesticated and cultivated as a pot ornamental, primarily because it does not have a survival pattern in the field conditions under different habitat or under different climatic conditions. This plant has adaptability mainly to tropical areas, but under present circumstances, because of its ornamental value wherein foliage as well as the flowers are beautiful, this is cultivated even at temperate, subalpine, even as well as alpine areas, primarily as a pot ornamental. Generally, this plant has two important characters. One, it can survive for as long as one desires, that is, it's a perennial, and it also can remain evergreen, that is, it remain fresh throughout the year. It does not actually show signs of dryness even during winter or at the peak of summer. That is primarily because of the fact that this plant, not only in the foliage portion but also in the underground portion, has a potential to maintain whatever aquatic wealth it absorbs as well as whatever nutrients it is able to absorb from the habitat or from the pots in which it is cultivated. This plant historically reveals that the ancient ornamental plant cultivators tried to develop a strategy wherein not only the plant as a whole, but whatever qualities it has can actually facilitate them to decorate wherever they were living. And such concept actually reflected that it can be maintained indoors, that is within the rooms or corridors of a home, or can be also maintained in the open sunny conditions on the lawn itself, or sometimes even on the outside of the windows. The concept of that cultivation is primarily because it prefers continuous exposure to sunny conditions, and wherein the soil in which it is cultivated or grown are actually maintaining and retaining whatever moisture is added throughout the life cycle, that means from the vegetative phase up to the reproductive phase. Generally, this plant has been seen to survive for much longer duration in comparison to almost all other ornamentals. However, there are variabilities. Botanically, this plant, known as begonia, is said to be a combination of roughly 1,000 and some claim 15,000 different species, and it is among the 10 largest genera known in the plant kingdom. That means those 10 genera which have much higher number of species in comparison to others, and that higher number in turn has been seen to reveal what sort of adaptability as well as productivity this plant have. For commercial ornamental cultivation, generally the two methods are followed, wherein either the propagation through rhizomatous portion, that is the part that is lying beneath the soil, or sometimes the cutting of branches or main axis is followed, so that it in turn will give rise to a productive plant or plantlet. For that method, that is wherein we use vegetative propagation techniques, there are usually two different seasons that are followed. Generally, under tropical areas, that is where the temperature during summer is extremely hot, in those areas the months of May and June are primarily followed. However, if it is cultivated as an ornamental in temperate areas, in those areas usually the preference is to use months of either July or sometimes even August for vegetative propagation. However, in this case, the standard method for propagation is that one has to opt for, first of all, selection of a branch or a branchlet that is to be cut or that is to be pruned, and then try to see in which particular soil or in which particular habitat this will actually give rise to a healthy plant or plantlet. Generally speaking, it has been seen that under tropical areas, once the plant is to be vegetatively propagated, they tend to use the main axis, that is the main stem of the plant, and try to cut it into fragments or sections and try to plant these in proper soil conditions wherein the soil texture is soft and the moisture content of the soil is suitable, facilitating the survival of that vegetative cutting. However, if the same propagation pattern is followed in temperate areas, in those areas generally speaking they opt the layering methods wherein the main axis of the plant is actually layered either in the pot itself or sometime into the secondary pot that is kept on the side of the same pot, so that that pot in turn will help in the development of the roots of that vegetative propagule or that branch or branchlet. Generally, for this there are two basic requirements. One, the pot which is to be vegetatively propagated should be irrigated at least a day in advance, so that at the time of cutting or pruning or at the time of layering, it has excessive quantities of moisture in the branches or the branchlets which are to be propagated. And second important requirement is that the soil in which it is to be planted in the form of a cutting or in the form of layering, that soil is also to be irrigated at least a day in advance. That irrigation actually facilitates the survival pattern of the layered branchlet or a cutting, so that that will ultimately give rise to a new plantlet or sometimes even a branchlet of the parental plant. Generally, for this usually two methods are followed. One method is that we start layering and cutting in the morning hours, usually around 8 a.m. in the morning, so that the fresh branchlets or fresh twigs are actually able to quickly adapt to the new habitat, while as in certain areas they also opt for cutting and layering in the evening hours, usually around 6 to 7 p.m. However, in both cases the fundamental requirement is that whatever the time, but the layered or cutlings should be kept under shady conditions and under slightly cooler climates, so that this is able to not only adapt but also give rise not only to roots but also to a healthy rootlet as well as the seedlings. Generally, wherever this method is followed, it is essential to monitor such layering and cuttings for at least 10 to 15 days to see whether new vegetative buds, that is a bud which will give rise to a leaf or a branchlet, is developing, and that in turn actually shows and reflects that the vegetative propagation method has succeeded and a new plantlet or a plant has been developed. However, sometimes it has been seen that even though the cutting or layering may be actually carried out about 15-20 days back, yet no vegetative buds or no branchlets are developing. This is primarily because certain habitats as well as certain plants itself have a prolonged period of adaptability as well as survival, thereby reflecting that the leaves may be green, branchlets may be green or fresh, but the development of the roots or rootlets may be slightly hampered. In such cases, the plants are to be kept under shady conditions, under cooler conditions for much longer duration in comparison to those where branchlet formation or bud formation has taken place. Further, during the propagation through vegetative means, one has to regularly monitor what the irrigation pattern is, and wherein whether one has to carry out regular irrigation of the pot or the soil in which it has been planted, or one has to monitor till it shows signs of dryness. Generally, for commercial cultivation, a method has been standardized wherein the soil should remain moist, but wherein it does not show any signs of cracking on the surface. That means wherein the moisture has not fully evaporated, so that that dry habitat in turn will not facilitate the survival of the plant. Under such cases, it has been seen that weekly irrigation, especially in the morning hours, necessitates not only the developmental pattern but also facilitates the proper vegetative propagation techniques. In this case, usually it has been seen that begonias have a potential not only to survive for longer durations in the pot conditions, but also maintain the productive potential in terms of foliage, that is the leaves, but also in terms of flowers, wherein the inflorescence, that is the flowers, usually develop sometimes twice, sometimes even 5 times per growing season. Such phenomena are unique to these plants, wherein the same plant actually produces flowers sometimes 3 or sometimes even 5 times per year, depending automatically on the conditions in which or the habitat under which it is cultivated and maintained. Usually, it has been seen that if the plant is maintained in the suitable habitat conditions, that is the tropical habitats wherein the conditions are adaptable for the plant itself as well as irrigation is regularized. In these cases, it will not only show adaptability, but also maintain productivity. However, if the same plant is cultivated under temperate regions, that is in those areas where the temperature in the spring months as well as autumn months and the temperature during winter is slightly cooler than the requirement of the plant, in such areas it has been seen that the plant is in need of providing either proper fertilizers or proper irrigation regularity, so that that in turn helps the survival pattern. Usually in cooler climatic conditions or temperate areas, it is necessary to take the spot during winter to storage conditions usually referred to as greenhouses or polyhouses or even hothouses, so that it is able to maintain its evergreen condition in those areas or in those pot or hothouses. This is essential primarily because a tropical plant is commercially cultivated as an ornamental in the temperate areas. In all areas where the temperature during winter or during spring or autumn is cooler, it has been seen that if the pot is kept continuously exposed in open habitat conditions, the plant itself not only shows depletion in production of the flowers as well as foliage, but it also shows depletion in its survival pattern, that is wherein the plant may not survive for longer durations, and automatically revealing that a perennial plant sometimes within a short span of time gets converted into an annual or even sometimes into a biennial, that is wherein it survives for 2 years. This reveals that a tropical plant can be converted into a temperate plant provided we are able to modify the habitat or the areas in which we cultivate it. Ordinarily, a greenhouse or a pot house is essential for those who try to cultivate it commercially, that is those who are actually commercial floriculturists. But if we want to cultivate this as a domestic ornamental, in such cases one criteria has been recommended to all those that it should be during winter shifted to those conditions where the temperature is much warmer and the habitat as such is actually much more humid than the outside conditions. Usually under temperate areas, especially in northern parts of India as well as European parts, it has been seen that if such plants in the pots are kept in the kitchens or corridors, they have tremendous survival pattern wherein they even flower at the peak of winter, wherein temperature may be touching 0 degrees or sometimes even dropping below 0 degrees Celsius. This is primarily because in the inner conditions, humidity as well as warmness facilitates the developmental pattern. Further, if this plant is to be maintained for longer durations, there are two important requirements. One, to add organic nutrients which actually are responsible for providing the natural heat to the root as well as the underground portion of the plant, so that that in turn will help plant to survive for longer duration. In such cases, at the time of addition, the soil around each plant in a pot or soil around the roots of the pot of the plant are dug out, and into this soil we try to add either ashes or sometimes cow dung manure, and if possible add a small quantity of inorganic nutrients, especially urea or DAP, so that that in turn increases the warmth of the pot, which automatically reveals that it will facilitate the longer or prolonged survival pattern of this plant in the pots. However, here a fundamental requirement is that at the time of addition of these organic nutrients or inorganic nutrients, there is a necessity to loosen the soil around the pots, and that loosened soil should be manually mixed with the organic or inorganic nutrients. This is primarily because addition of nutrients and mixing of this nutrient with the basic habitat, that is the soil around the root, actually facilitates the proper absorption pattern by the plant, which in turn makes the soil much more warmer and much more nutritious and suitable for the survival of the plants. In areas wherein the cultivation is carried under those areas where the climatic condition during winter drops to much below 0 degrees, it has been seen that providing artificial sources of heat, that is addition of grasses around the basal part of the root, that is the pot itself, actually facilitates not only survival pattern, but in turn actually provides artificial heat to the plant, which in turn facilitates its survival pattern. Such practices are usually followed in those areas where the climatic conditions during winter are extremely cold and humidity is much below the requirement of the plant. Further, in these areas it has been seen that if excessive irrigation is carried out, that excessive irrigation in turn may actually defect not only productive potential but also cause negativities to the survival pattern of the plant, wherein not only the plant sometimes dies, but sometimes the foliage, that is the parts that are aerial which are also ornamental, can gradually get dried up or actually show signs of senescence, which in turn may automatically drop out. That means convert a productive plant into a non-productive drying or senescent plant. This pattern has been seen to affect not only the productive potential but also the survival pattern in those areas wherein temperature during winter or sometimes even in summer is much below the requirement of the plant. One more character that has been identified, especially in temperate areas, is that if it is kept continuously well drained, or that is wherein the water is added but it is evaporated excessively or drained out from the lower portion of the pot, that excessive addition or excessive drainage in turn has been seen to affect not only survival pattern but also the quality productivity in terms of flowers as well as foliage of the plant. Further, if the water is added but the evaporation is at a much faster speed, that is temperature is higher, humidity is lower, in those areas it has been seen that that in turn also negatively affects the survival pattern as well as the quality of the production. In the temperate areas, wherever people want to cultivate it as a commercial ornamental, they tend to actually develop strategies wherein the pot itself actually has a potential to sustain much denser plants. That means those plants which have excessive potential of producing branches, and that branch in turn may cover the apical portion of the pot fully, so that one sometimes is not able to see whether this is a pot or whether this is the ornamental as such covering the whole soil. Such criteria or dimensions have been seen to improve not only quality of production but also improve the ornamental value of the plant. At present, there are certain areas, especially where it is actually grown as a commercial ornamental, they tend to actually cut off flowers. That is, they want to see whether the foliage itself actually is revealing the ornamental quality of the plant, and it has revealed that denser the foliage, lesser the flowers, much better quality of the ornamental is shown by the plant, primarily because in such plants the size of the foliage, that is the size of a leaf, is much bigger than the size of the plant in size of the foliage in those plants wherein denser flowers or larger number of flowers are produced. However, in such plants the addition of nutrients, especially inorganic nutrients, has been seen to facilitate developmental pattern as well as the number and size of the leaves than in those wherein addition of nutrients is slightly lower, automatically revealing that nutrient in turn actually facilitate vegetative development. Further, if a plant which is tried to be cultivated as a field ornamental, there are certain areas, especially in tropical regions, they try to cultivate the same plant as a field ornamental, there must be an essential development wherein the field has a potential to actually eradicate those plants or those types of plant which actually create excessive shade in the vicinity of the same plant, or wherein excessive quantities of moisture are retained in the bed in which this is cultivated as a field ornamental. However, in temperate areas or those areas where winter is cooler or spring and autumn are cooler, or where there is excessive rainfall, this plant has not been able to adapt as a field cultivated ornamental, revealing thereby that whosoever discovered it, that discovery in turn revealed that adaptability pattern as well as commercial cultivation practice is mainly pot oriented, that is, this plant should be always maintained as a pot ornamental. However, in areas wherein the summer conditions are suitable, that means where there is no excessive rainfall and sometimes the temperature is not much higher than the temperature required by the plant or much lower than the temperature required by the plant, in those areas it has been seen to survive even in field oriented beds, that is as a lawn plant, lawn ornamental. However, here essence is that one should not cultivate any other plant in the same bed, either in the basal rows or in the terminal rows, revealing thereby that any shade in the front row or in the back row actually is a fundamental drawback for the plant, thereby depleting not only its survival but also affecting its productive quality. So, at present, whosoever tries to cultivate this as a field ornamental, the preference is for those beds which are actually open, where there is no other taller or denser plant growing in the vicinity, and where the climatic conditions are much more tropical and much more suitable for the survival of the plant, while as in those areas where such conditions are not available, they try to domesticate and commercially cultivate this as a pot ornamental. For commercial cultivators, there is one fundamental requirement, and that is that whatever pots they use for its cultivation and whatever habitats they use for its cultivation and commercial production, they should always try to provide it whatever fundamental requirements the plant has, that is a well drained soil rich in organic matter as well as rich in nutrients, wherein its cultivation is carried under open sunny conditions. I hope those of you who are interested in cultivating this as a pot ornamental for commercial production should follow the guidelines and try to domesticate and commercialize its production for their own benefits, as well as guide those who want to cultivate this as a domestic ornamental. Thank you.